Fairy Moonbeams. Children's Book Collection Library of the University of California, Los Angeles. The princess fainting, after piercing her hand with the spindle. There were, many, many years ago, a king and queen who had no children, which made them very unhappy indeed. Hoping by some means or other to have an heir, they agreed to consult all the fairies they could hear of, rows, pilgrimages, everything was tried, but without success. Some time after this, it was proclaimed that the queen was going to have a child, and shortly after a princess was born. The christening was the most sumptuous imaginer. Leaping Beauty conveyed to her couch Abel, and 7 fairies, being all that could be found in the country, were invited to be her godmothers, so that each of them might bestow upon her a gift, as was the custom in those days. When the ceremony of baptism was over, a splendid entertainment was prepared for the fairies, before each of whom was set a magnificent cover of massive gold, with knife, fork, and spoon, set with diamonds and rubies, all of the most curious workmanship. As the company were about to place themselves at the table, an old fairy, who had been forgotten for many years, entered the banquet room. The king immediately ordered a cover to be brought for her, but it could not be of massive gold, because only 7 had been made. 3. The old fairy, seeing that her cover was not so handsome as those of the other fairies, muttered that she would be revenged. A young fairy, who sat near her, and heard her, resolved to prevent, as far as she could, the harm intended by the old fairy. The fairies now began to bestow their gifts on the infant princess. The first said that she should be most beautiful, the second, that she should be very witty, the third, that she should have enchanting grace, the fourth, that she should dance delightfully, the fifth, that she should sing like a nightingale, and the sixth, that she should excel in playing on every musical instrument. The old fairy now stepped forward and said, "The princess shall pierce her hand with a spindle, and die of the wound." The young fairy, who had concealed herself till just now, stepped forward and said, "Do not afflict yourselves, O king and queen, the princess shall not die of her wound, she shall only sleep for 100 years, at the end of which time she shall be awakened by an amiable young prince." The king, anxious to prevent the injury to his daughter, caused it to be proclaimed that no person should hereafter use a spindle. As the princess grew up, all the graces bestowed upon her began to show themselves, and she became more and more engaging. One day, she went into an apartment in a remote part of the palace, in which an old woman was spinning with a spindle. The princess, never having seen one before, took the spindle, and the end of it pierced her hand, when she instantly fell into a profound sleep. The old woman was greatly frightened, and called for assistance. Her cries speedily brought the king and queen, who had the princess removed to her own apartment, and laid on a couch. The kind fairy who had saved her from death, now appeared, and waving her wand, caused every person in the palace to fall asleep, so that they might awake with the princess, and be ready to attend her, when her long sleep was over. The splendid banquet given to TL many years passed away, and a dense forest grew up around the palace, which almost hid it from view. When the 100 years had elapsed, a prince and his followers were hunting near the spot, and as he came near to the trees, they separated to let him pass. Onward he passed, the trees closing after him, and at last he arrived at the palace gates. He entered, but the silence which reigned within quite startled him. However, he took courage, and passed through several rooms, in which every person he saw was fast asleep. At length the prince entered a splendid apartment, where lay, on an elegant couch, the most beautiful lady he had ever beheld. With intense admiration he gazed upon her for some time, and falling on one knee, he at the baptism of the princess, gently took the hand of the princess, and pressed it to his lips. The enchantment was now ended. The princess opened her eyes, and with a look of tenderness said, "Is it yon, prince? How long I have waited for you." And the prince, delighted at these words, assured her that he loved her better than he did himself. A long time was sweetly passed in conversation, and the prince declared how happy he felt in having been the means of releasing one so beautiful from such a cruel enchantment. "Ah, dear prince," replied she, "it was you who were my companion during my long sleep. I very well knew that he who should end my enchantment would be the handsomest of men, and that he would love the prince and his attendants hunting near Sleeping Beauty's palace, me even more than he loved himself, and the moment I saw you, I recollected your face." The attendants of the princess awoke at the same time, and commenced their several duties as if nothing had happened, even the fire, at which the joints and game had been roasting, suddenly rekindled, and the cook bustled about to have all things ready at what he supposed to be the proper time. The prince now assisted the princess to rise. She was magnificently dressed, but he wisely did not tell her that her clothes were in the style of those worn by his great-grandmother. However, they became the princess so well, that she looked exceedingly beautiful. The princess taking refreshment after her long sleep, he took her hand, and conducted her to the apartment in which the refreshments were served, and as soon as they were seated at the table, the musicians, who were in readiness with their instruments, began to play some airs, which, although very old, were nevertheless extremely agreeable. In fact, the prince felt himself so happy, with the old-fashioned appearance of everything that met his view, whichever way he looked, and which seemed to borrow a charm from the beautiful princess, that he was completely filled with pleasure. The prince and princess passed the evening, greatly delighted with each other's company, and agreed that the chaplain should marry them that night. The ceremony. The prince conducting the beautiful princess to his father's palace, accordingly took place, and the next day, the prince conducted his bride, accompanied by her attendants, in grand state, to his father's palace. The trees which surrounded the palace where the Sleeping Beauty had reposed for 100 years, were mostly gone. Just a few remained, and triumphal arches had been put up, for the procession to pass under, but who placed them there was a mystery. Some supposed it to have been the work of the good fairy who had so long watched over and taken such great care of the Sleeping Beauty, but no one knew for certain. Of this we may rest assured, that the prince and his beautiful wife passed a long and happy life. McClure Live 30 Beekman Street, New York, manufacturers of toy books, games, and paper dolls book form, series No. L10 Chi.